Language learning seems like a great idea until we actually get started. But I thought you wanted to learn a foreign language. Not like this. Not like this. There are many factors that can affect how successful a learner is of a target language. Some people seem to learn easily and others struggle and inevitably give up. And if you want to avoid getting caught in this trap, then keep watching, because there is one thing that everybody who fails to learn a language probably shares. In this video, I'm going to explain what I think that is and what you can do to avoid making the same mistakes. Now, I'm not a natural language learner, whatever one of those is, and I failed for years because of one simple thing. What was even more important is how to avoid the mistakes that generates. The thing that utterly killed my language learning progress was that I had the wrong expectations, and that can be fatal. So let me explain why. First of all, as a beginner, I misunderstood understanding. What? Basically, it seemed like there was this binary position between understanding something and not understanding it at all. Like, oh, I've looked up that word and now I've totally acquired it. I don't need to worry about that anymore and I can move on to the rest of the vocabulary. But it isn't that simple. In learning a language, every time your brain sees a word, it's like it gets a tiny portion of it, and therefore it needs to see that word many, many times in order to fully acquire it. And consequently, that means we have to get comfortable with a degree of ambiguity when we're learning. So if I'm reading a story, for example, I can follow along with the story without needing to define every single word that I'm reading. As you get exposed to the same words over the course of the story, you start to get a more concrete sense of them as you progress. Obviously though, you do need to understand enough, otherwise you're not really going to learn anything. Which leads me to a mistake that I made and many others do, where I thought that buying some sort of book, an app subscription, any other material, that was an investment in my progress. But if you don't use them, you're not going to make any progress at all. Complete beginners will often chase what they think sounds easiest because their expectations are that you can learn a second language without actually that much commitment. But that simply isn't true. Clearly, it takes a lot of commitment, but that commitment needn't be painful. My Spanish, for example, I do something every day and it feels like I've made a ton of progress. I've just been listening to easy-ish stuff and reading easy-ish stuff, and I've been naturally acquiring the language that way. And whatever books or apps or other material that there simply often isn't enough material there in that one resource to take you to fluency. Therefore, we need to get a lot more time with the language in multiple different resources. If you think each book or resource as a brick and you're going to build a house by using each of these bricks just by getting exposure to the language. And that leads me on to the biggest thing of all, time. People who fail often just don't realize the sheer amount of time it takes to learn a language. So if you just did a short course, or maybe you read a graded reader, for example, don't be that worried if you don't feel like you've made huge amounts of progress just yet. It's going to take you hundreds of hours until you naturally acquire a substantial amount of the language. If you haven't stuck with it long enough, then you just need to keep going. And another thing about time is that if you just go to one class a week or even 2 classes a week, you're not going to make huge amounts of progress. The main thing is the amount of time we spend with the language, and therefore you need to be getting as much input as you can. But that input doesn't have to be hard, doesn't have to be sitting down and studying. You can just focus on listening to easy-ish material and reading things that are interesting enough to you. And another place when our expectations let us down is when we speak. It's actually very hard to speak a foreign language well, especially if we don't have high level of comprehension. And you'll get a lot of that comprehension through exposure to the language, through using video resources, audio material, and of course from reading. I'm going to do a much longer video later on this year once I've got more experience from learning Spanish, but what I would say is expecting too much too soon and trying to rush the language learning process just seems to suck the joy out of the whole experience. I've mentioned recently that I'm reading in Spanish now, which is just adding to my sense of the language. I'm in no rush to speak, and so I don't have any expectations as to my abilities. I just have to focus on trying to understand whatever material I'm using and just try and enjoy the process from there. Learning a language involves many different skills, and so why try and master them all at the same time? You can do, of course, and there will be overlap, let's be honest, between, if I'm listening to stuff, I might then go and read the transcript for that, for example, but it doesn't have to be day one. We have to try and work on all of the activities involved in a language, so we don't have to start speaking on day one if we don't want to, we don't have to start reading on day one. Whatever you want to do, whatever interests you, whatever sort of learner you are, if you want to get into that, you just do that. You do you. There's no perfect way to learn a language. I'm not telling you exactly how to do it. I'm trying to help with my little bit of experience. And a lot of learning a foreign language is just trying to experiment and see what stuff works for you. Oh, I've tried that, I enjoyed that, but I'm gonna put my own spin on it, or I tried that and I absolutely hated it. That's fine. That's how you learn. You are your own learner. That's the joy of learning a language as an adult. We are sort of self-starters, to use one of those slightly sticky words. We can be self-starters and find the material we like, do the sorts of things we like doing, and just pick up a foreign language without having to spend hours and hours studying at a desk, because if we sort of imagine like we were in school, it can be enjoyable and it doesn't have to be hard. I just focus on listening and comprehension first of all with my Spanish, and now I'm moving over to do some reading and trying to comprehend, and eventually I will output and start speaking. But at each of these stages, I'm just trying to do one thing at a time. So I'm not trying to do multiple different things at once. I'm staying with one thing, listening for example, waiting to improve that, and then moving on from there. That wasn't part of my plan, by the way. It's just so happened by trying to follow this method and improve my comprehension of listening and watching stuff first, or it's just so happened that I've done that skill first, and now that I'm moving on to reading, now that I've got a sense of the sounds of the language, now I'm reading, and eventually, once my comprehension is even higher, I will then start to speak. Now, I don't think things are necessarily all about input. You might enjoy doing grammar study, and that helps you to make sense of the language and notice these things that have come up. Or maybe you enjoy doing flashcards and you feel that helps you understand vocabulary quicker. Or maybe even pronunciation practice to try and hone your accent. That's all fine. There's no problem with doing any of that at all, but none of that will have nearly the same impact if you don't get a huge amount of exposure to the language through a lot of input. That isn't talking about the language in your native language, it is just getting exposed to material at the right level for you that is just in your target language. Which is why, particularly for beginners, the most important thing in my opinion is just getting a huge amount of input. When our expectations don't match our experiences, people get disheartened and give up. We might get inspired by watching language learners on YouTube when they learn a language in a week, for example, but then feel a bit let down when our experiences don't match that. There are many reasons for those sorts of videos, but don't be disheartened when sometimes people make those without being that honest about their method or their experience. So don't let your expectations stop your progress. Just know it's going to take hundreds of hours to succeed, so you might as well start now and do something every day, and you will start making progress. There are many different methods you can use, but I really recommend this one here. Check out this video where I'm going to talk about a method that is a complete game changer for my language learning. Just check it out. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the journey. Good luck.